Imagine a wall of wind so dense it has weight. Snow moves sideways at the speed of a river in flood, and the horizon disappears not into distance, but into whiteness. There is no tree to lean against, no hill to hide behind, no wooden roof anywhere within 100 miles. The temperature is -50. In this place, a man in a coat sewn from reindeer skin walks slowly across the tundra, checking the tethers of his sled and the breath of his lead deer. He is not lost. He is home. Ask yourself for a moment how anyone can live here. Not visit, not endure a season, but live. Live year after year in a land where the ground is frozen deeper than a well is dug, where winter lasts 8 months, where the sun disappears for weeks and the wind never quite stops. Ask how a household moves through such a place, carrying its house on its back, and how a fire is kept alive when there is nothing taller than a knee to burn. The answer lies not in stubbornness, but in an old and careful knowledge, passed hand to hand across the centuries by a people who call themselves the Nenets. The Nenets are among the last true nomads of the Arctic. They live in the far north of Siberia and along the great flat peninsula of Yamal, which juts into the icy Kara Sea like a tongue of the mainland. Their name in their own language means roughly the human beings, the real people, and they have kept that identity across a landscape that would erase a stranger in a single night. To the south lie the taiga forests, and beyond them the towns and railways of Russia. But the Nenets belong to the treeless zone, to the tundra proper, that immense low plain of mosses, lichens, dwarf birches, and frozen lakes that stretches from the Ural Mountains to the mouth of the Yenisei and beyond. The tundra is not empty, it is only patient. In summer, the top layer thaws into a spongy carpet of green and gold, dotted with pools where clouds of mosquitoes rise like smoke. In winter, everything hardens into a pale desert of snow and ice, sculpted by the wind into long ridges called sastrugi, sharp as the edge of a saw. This is the land the Nenets have chosen, or have been chosen by, and their entire way of life is a long answer to the question of how to move through it without being defeated by it. Their home is called a chum. It is not a hut, not a cabin, not a house in any European sense. It is a cone of tall wooden poles leaned together at the top and covered with heavy sheets of reindeer skin stitched into panels called nukes. In summer, lighter covers of canvas or worn hide are used. In winter, thick pelts of long winter fur go on the outside, sometimes doubled, sometimes with a lining of softer skins turned inward, so that the fur points down and traps the warm air. The whole structure is a piece of engineering older than most nations. The steep cone sheds snow. The circular base gives the wind nothing flat to press against. The poles anchor into the frozen ground or into stacked sleds. Inside, at the center, a small iron stove or an open fire replaces what the sun does not give. A chum can be raised in an hour or less. It can be taken down almost as quickly. Every pole has its place. Every skin has its number. Every rope knot is tied in a manner that will not seize with frost. When a household breaks camp, the chum is folded onto its own sled, the covers rolled tightly, the poles bundled and laid along the runners. Nothing is wasted, nothing is left behind. The tundra receives no litter because the tundra will keep it for 1,000 years, and the Nenets know this. What comes with them, leaves with them. Now, if the chum is the shell, the reindeer is the blood. Without the northern reindeer, there would be no Nenets on the tundra. That is not a poetic exaggeration. It is a simple accounting of everything a person needs. The reindeer is transport, pulling sleds across snow that would swallow a horse and swallow a truck. The reindeer is meat, protein and fat that keeps a body burning through the cold. The reindeer is clothing, boots, gloves, hats. The reindeer is the covering of the house, the thongs of the harness, the sinew that stitches the seams. Even the antlers, when shed each spring, become handles and hooks and small carvings. Even the bones become tools. Even the blood, drunk fresh, becomes a medicine against the pale illness of long winters. Herds move constantly. In autumn, they push south toward the wooded edge of the tundra, where deeper snow gives shelter from the worst winds. In spring, they push north toward the coast, toward open plains where cool sea breezes will later ease the plague of insects. This great yearly breathing, north in summer, south in winter, has traced the same lines for centuries. The Nenets follow. They do not lead the herd so much as travel with it. They keep it together, guard it against wolves, cull it for meat and hides, and in return, the herd carries them and clothes them and feeds them. The name for a caravan of loaded sleds is argish. When it is time to move, sometimes only after a day, sometimes after 2 or 3 weeks in the same place, the argish forms in a long line across the snow. Sleds heavy with poles, sleds heavy with hides, sleds heavy with iron stoves and pots and lengths of rope, sleds carrying the dogs, sleds carrying meat, sleds for adults to sit on. Each sled is pulled by a small team of trained reindeer, harnessed side by side to a single yoke and driven with a long pole rather than a whip. The argish stretches sometimes for a full mile, snaking across the white plain, its runners hissing on the packed snow. From above, it looks like a slow, dark thread being pulled through a bolt of pale cloth. To someone from the outside, the temperature seems the biggest problem. It is not. It is one problem among many. The Nenets solve it first at the body and only then at the shelter. Their answer is layered fur, cut and sewn with a genius that no laboratory has yet improved upon. The main garment is the militsa. It is a long tunic of reindeer skin, the fur turned inward against the body, with a hood attached and mittens sewn directly to the sleeves so that no gap opens at the wrist. Over it, in the worst weather, a second garment called the sovik is thrown on, this one with the fur turned outward to shed wind and snow. Together, they enclose a person in what is essentially a small, mobile den of warm air. The legs are dressed in fur trousers, and the feet in high boots made of camus, the tough, short-haired skin from the lower legs of the reindeer. Camus is astonishing material. It is nearly waterproof by nature. It grips the snow so that a person does not slip on hard ice, and it insulates so well that a herder can stand still for hours in cold that would kill an unprotected foot in minutes. Inside the boot, a lining of dry grass or soft fur wraps the foot. When the lining grows damp with sweat, it is taken out, beaten free of moisture in the freezing air, and dried again. Nothing is trivial in this system. A wet foot is a lost foot. A lost foot in the tundra is a lost life. Sleep in the chum happens under piles of the same skins. A person crawls under a heavy layer of reindeer hides, head near the wall of the tent, feet toward the fire, and lets the accumulated warmth of the day and the low glow of the coals do the rest. Even when the fire dies down in the deepest hours of the night, and even when frost creeps along the inside of the chum cover, the sleeping bundle stays warm because the fur has trapped a small climate of its own. This is why the reindeer skin is so precious. It is not just leather. It is a hollow tube inside every hair, a natural insulation that traps still air the way modern jackets try to imitate. Food follows the same logic as clothing. It must burn slowly, warm from within, and defend the body against the long night. The Nenets eat reindeer meat in almost every possible form. Fresh, boiled in a pot with a little salt. Dried, cut into long strips, and hung inside the chum. Frozen and shaved into thin curls, the dish called stroganina, eaten with knife and finger while it melts on the tongue. But the most striking part of the diet, and perhaps the most misunderstood by outsiders, is the eating of raw meat and the drinking of fresh, warm blood. When a reindeer is slaughtered, the herders gather around and the meat is offered at once, still steaming in the freezing air. A cup of blood is passed. It is not a spectacle, it is medicine. Here is why. In the Arctic, fresh plants do not grow for most of the year. There are no gardens, no orchards, no market stalls of green leaves. Vitamin C, that small molecule which prevents scurvy, must come from somewhere. In cooked meat, it breaks down quickly. In raw meat and in fresh blood, it survives. Generations of Nenets who never opened a science book still learned by observation that those who ate their meat raw stayed strong, and those who insisted on cooking everything grew weak. Modern nutritionists, when they finally studied the tundra diet, confirmed what the herders already knew. The custom is not archaic, it is precise. It is a chemistry lesson written in blood and hunger and the memory of ancestors. Fish are eaten in the same way. Whitefish, muksun, omul, all sliced thin and frozen and served without cooking. In summer, when the rivers open, fish are caught by nets under the ice or in traps set at river mouths. Some are dried in the wind. Some are packed in barrels and buried in the permafrost, which functions as a natural freezer as reliable as any modern warehouse. Berries are gathered in autumn, cloudberries and cranberries and crowberries, and stored in fat or in cold to be eaten through the winter. The land seems bare, but for a hand that knows where to look, it is a pantry. Water is another puzzle. In summer, the tundra is soaked with it, ponds everywhere, streams looping across the moss. In winter, all of that is stone. To drink, the Nenets melt snow, but not any snow. Fresh, clean snow taken from a spot upwind of the chum, far from the reindeer trail, is scooped into an iron pot and set on the fire. Old crusted snow, yellowed or stained, is left. It takes a surprising amount of snow to make a small pot of water, so this melting is a steady daily task, quiet as the shadow of the fire itself. And what feeds the fire in a land without trees? Here, the ingenuity of the tundra people becomes especially visible. In the southern part of Nenets country, there are still low forests of larch and pine, and wood can be gathered and hauled north on sleds. In the true tundra, though, the tallest plant is a dwarf willow that barely reaches the knee, and even that only in sheltered hollows. So the household gathers what the ground offers. Dwarf willow twigs, dry stalks of last year's grasses, tough clumps of shrubby birch pulled from beneath the snow, all bundled and carried back to the chum. When even that is scarce, reindeer fat is burned in shallow lamps, and the flame is small but faithful. In the worst nights, the stove is fed sparingly, coal by twig by careful coal, and every person dresses warmly indoors as well as out. Heat is not a right in the tundra. It is a rationed guest. The sled deserves its own attention because it is not the sled of a picture book. The Nenets sled, called a narta, is a low, slim vehicle built without a single nail. The runners are of hard wood, curved upward at the front. The frame is lashed together with strips of reindeer hide, thin and strong. Rawhide has an interesting property. When it dries, it shrinks. So the joints of a Nenets sled are made damp, then allowed to freeze, and the shrinking hide pulls every joint tight without ever needing screws or metal. On the tundra where iron rusts and glue fails, this old technique still outperforms modern joinery. Several kinds of narta serve different needs. There is the light sled for a single driver, quick and agile, drawn by 2 or 3 deer, used to check the herd or to visit a neighboring camp. There is the heavy freight sled, low to the ground, that carries a stove, poles, or barrels of frozen fish. There is the covered sled, where a passenger can sit wrapped in furs during a long move. When the argish is on the move, these sleds are tied one behind the other in disciplined order, so that a single team of lead reindeer, guided by a driver on the first sled, pulls a chain of loaded runners that hisses through the snow like a soft, dry sea. Reindeer are trained for driving from a young adult age. Bulls castrated for work grow calm and strong. They are taught to accept the harness, to answer voice commands, to keep pace, to hold together at a rest halt. A good lead reindeer is worth more than gold. It reads the snow better than any driver, senses the softer patches, finds the firmer roots, and in a whiteout, when the driver cannot see the tips of his own boots, it may still steer for home because its own memory of scent and slope has not been erased by the wind. The Nenets do not sentimentalize their animals, but they respect them, and a beloved lead reindeer will be honored by name for years after its death. Now think about that whiteout again. Imagine standing in the middle of an infinite flat plain, in a howling snowstorm so dense that the air itself glows pale gray. There is no sun visible, no shadow to give you a compass, no landmark, no sound but the wind. How does anyone navigate in such a place, in a language before satellites and long before compasses reached the north? The Nenets read the wind. In the tundra, the prevailing winds blow from a familiar direction across most of the winter. As they scour the snow, they carve those long parallel ridges called sastrugi. Ripples of hardened snow, aligned like the grain of wood. A traveler who has grown up with the tundra can crouch down, feel the ridges with a mitten, and know instantly which way is roughly north, which way is south. The sastrugi become a map that lies right beneath the runners of the sled. They also read the stars. On clear nights, when the northern lights hang like green curtains across the sky, the constellations mark direction as reliably as any signpost. In particular, the pole star, which stays almost fixed above the horizon in the far north, is a silent lantern for those who know it. And when neither sastrugi nor stars are visible, the Nenets rely on the last and deepest map of all, which is memory. Memory of route, of curve of river, of shape of low ridge, of the way the wind sang past this particular hollow 2 winters ago. A herder who has traveled the same migration circuit many times owns a map inside the head that no paper could match. Belief in this world is inseparable from survival. The Nenets have long practiced their own form of animist religion, in which the tundra is not empty scenery, but a vast community of spirits. The sky itself is spoken of as a great being. The earth is another. Rivers have their own presences. Certain hills, certain lakes, certain lonely rock outcrops on the plain are recognized as sacred places where offerings of coins or cloth or reindeer antlers are left. Before a hunter takes a wild reindeer, he speaks quietly. Before crossing a river on the ice, he acknowledges it. This is not superstition in the mocking sense. It is a moral relationship with a landscape that could kill without warning. To respect a place is, in practice, to pay attention to it, and paying attention is what keeps a traveler alive. Shamans were once the great mediators between the human community and the spirits of the tundra. They wore special coats hung with metal charms. They used a drum stretched with reindeer hide, and they entered trance to search for lost souls, to speak with ancestors, to seek advice for the herd. During the Soviet century, shamanism was harshly suppressed, and many of the old drums were confiscated or burned. Yet fragments survived. Practices went indoors. Songs were remembered. Today, the tradition has come back in a quieter form. Small offerings still hang on certain trees at the southern edge of the range. Certain hills are still not crossed lightly. The old logic is intact, even where the old ceremonies are only half remembered. The reindeer itself sits at the center of belief, as it sits at the center of everything else. It is treated as a partner rather than a possession. Certain animals are marked as sacred and are never slaughtered. When a reindeer is killed for meat, thanks are given, and no part is wasted. The skull may be placed on a sled or carried to a family sanctuary. The line between the household and the herd is not a wall, but a bridge. To the outside eye, this can look like ceremony. Inside the tundra, it is common sense in the shape of ritual, a way of keeping a fragile agreement between a hungry people and a generous, fragile ecosystem. Now imagine the other side of this life. Because respect for the tundra does not mean the tundra is kind. The tundra can kill quickly. A blizzard, called a purga in these regions, can rise in less than an hour, driving snow so hard that it feels like sand against the face. A person who is caught away from the chum in such a storm may lie down beside a sled, turn a fur outward toward the wind, and simply wait. Hours become days. Sometimes the storm passes and the traveler stands up. Sometimes only the sled is found. There is a special word in the herding tradition for one of the cruelest events in the tundra, an ice glaze that seals the pasture. The Nenets call the bitter phenomenon behind it a form of jut. When a warm snap in autumn is followed by hard freezing rain, the surface of the snow turns into a plate of ice as thick as a plank. Reindeer, who feed all winter by digging through soft snow with their hooves to reach the pale lichen underneath, which the herders know by the old name Yamal, cannot break through such a crust. They walk in circles, they weaken, they starve. Whole herds have been lost this way in a single bad season. Herders speak of these years with a hushed voice, because when the herd goes, everything else follows. Wolves are another danger, gray and clever, moving in packs across the moonlit plain. Dogs guard the herd, but wolves are patient and only need one careless night. A single wounded animal at the edge of the flock can turn into a whole broken flank of the herd by morning. Thin ice is a third danger, especially at river crossings in the shoulder seasons of autumn and spring. And then there are the small, quiet enemies. Frostbite that turns a cheek waxy without pain, wet mittens that become bricks of ice, a cough that in a warm room would be nothing, but in a chum on the tundra can grow into pneumonia within days. The list is long, the margin is narrow. This is why every gesture of the Nenets, every knot, every stitch, every choice of camp is polished by generations of consequence. Yet if the tundra is dangerous, it is also, in its own austere way, generous. When the summer sun finally rises and does not set, when the moss turns green and the ponds shine, when swans and geese fill the sky, the tundra offers a season of light so complete that people barely sleep. Reindeer graze until their flanks fill out, berries ripen, rivers pour with fish. The Nenets shift their camps often in these months to give the fragile ground time to recover between grazings, and the herd fattens for the winter to come. Then autumn arrives with its short, blazing red of dwarf birch and cranberry vine, and everything begins the long, slow tilt back into cold. The wheel turns again. The chum comes down. The argish forms. The old maps are followed once more. To an outsider, this life can seem like a museum piece, a scene from a century long past, kept alive as a curiosity. It is not. The Nenets are a living people of the 21st century. They ride snowmobiles when it makes sense. They carry satellite phones. Some camps have solar panels lashed to a sled to charge a phone or a small radio. Many members of a nomadic clan spend part of their year in a settled village where they earn wages, buy supplies, and then return to the tundra to rejoin the herd. The nomad and the modern are not opposites here. They are two seasons of the same life. The Yamal Peninsula, where many of the Nenets live, sits on top of one of the largest reserves of natural gas on the planet. In recent decades, the tundra has seen roads pushed across old migration routes, pipelines drawn through pastures, and drilling rigs raised in places that used to be reached only by sled. The gas that heats apartments in distant cities begins its journey under the very moss the reindeer graze upon. For the Nenets, this brings both benefit and threat. There is money, work, medicine, transport. There is also disturbance of the herd, loss of pasture, the cutting of ancestral tracks, and the pressure to move less freely across a land that once belonged entirely to weather and to hoof. Climate change adds another layer. The Arctic is warming faster than any other region on Earth. Winters are becoming less predictable. Those cruel ice glazes on the pasture are appearing more often. Permafrost, which for uncounted centuries stood as solid as bedrock, is beginning to thaw in patches, opening sinkholes, sinking sleds, releasing methane, changing the geometry of rivers. The Nenets are not the cause of any of this. They are, however, among the first to feel it in the balance sheet of their herds. Where their forebears calculated risk in generations, they now calculate it in seasons. Still, they persist. There is something almost stubborn about the persistence, and something quietly triumphant. In an age of paved roads and heated cars, of instant deliveries and ceiling lights, a people continue to raise their conical homes on the empty snow, to drink hot tea beside a low fire fed with dry twigs, to sleep beneath the winter fur of an animal they have raised themselves, and to move onward at dawn behind a lead reindeer whose name they know. This is not nostalgia. It is competence. It is the daily proof that human beings, given enough patience and enough knowledge of their surroundings, can inhabit almost anywhere on this planet, including places that most of us can barely visit. If you were to stand at the edge of a Nenets camp on a still winter evening when the wind has fallen and the sky above the tundra is a pale green sheet streaked with faint red, you would see a small circle of chums, their skins glowing softly from the fires within. You would hear the low breathing of tethered reindeer. You would smell the sharp, clean smell of frozen snow and the faint smoke of burning willow. Somewhere out on the plain, a dog would bark once and fall silent. Everything would seem impossibly fragile. And yet, you would be looking at one of the oldest, most successful answers our species has ever given to the question of how to live in a cold and difficult world. The tundra will keep asking that question. The wind will keep carving its ridges into the snow. The reindeer will keep moving on their ancient paths, and the herders will keep moving with them. When the pipelines are old and rusted, when this century has become another line in a history book, the sound of runners on packed snow will very likely still be heard somewhere on Yamal, somewhere along the Yenisei, somewhere in the immense north that only a few of us can name. It is the sound of a people who never left, and who, quietly and without fanfare, keep showing what a human being can bear, and what a human being can love, in the coldest places on Earth.